First of all, you like and subscribe my channel. Thank you for witching Imagine, a secret brotherhood of men, feared more than the witches they hunted, sworn to a life of cold devotion and loneliness. They believed they were God's chosen soldiers, but the villagers whispered something far darker, that these men carried a curse, one that doomed them to die forgotten, unloved, and erased from the world. This is the story of the witch hunters who never married, and the curse that followed them. Their tale begins in the late 15th century, when Europe was aflame with fear of witchcraft. The church preached that the devil walked among men, hiding in the laughter of women, in herbs gathered at night, in the whispered charms of midwives. It was enough to make communities look at their neighbors with suspicion. In this climate of terror, a band of men formed what they believed was a holy brotherhood, sanctioned by God himself. Unlike priests or monks, they were not cloistered behind stone walls. They roamed from town to town, searching for witches. They lived by 3 vows: celibacy, loyalty, and purity. No woman would ever touch their bed, no family would ever claim them, and no love would soften their hearts. They dressed in dark coats, carried iron crosses, and spoke with severity that silenced crowds. They brought with them strange tools, sharp needles to prick the flesh in search of devil's marks, ropes for binding, and cold eyes that rarely blinked. If they suspected a woman of sorcery, no amount of tears could save her. A smile at the wrong time, herbs hanging in her kitchen, or even being widowed was enough to mark her as guilty. Townsfolk often feared the hunters more than the witches, for wherever they walked, dread followed. In villages across Germany, France, and Italy, their presence was like a storm. They would arrive unannounced, set up in the church or manor hall, and begin questioning women, sometimes even children. Whisper accusations spread like wildfire. She cured fevers with herbs. She baked bread too well. She danced when no music played. The hunters demanded confessions, and if none came willingly, they took them by force. Women were stripped, examined for unnatural marks, and tortured until their voices cracked. All of it was done in the name of purity. All of it was done while the hunters watched, with their vow of celibacy twisted into a justification for cruelty. The people began to notice a pattern. Wherever the hunters stayed, misfortune seemed to follow. A barn would burn in the night. A plague would spread among the cattle. Children would fall ill. If a drought had not yet struck, it soon would. And so the whispers began. Maybe the hunters themselves were cursed. Maybe by rejecting marriage, by denying love, they had offended not only humanity, but also God. A widow in France, burned after refusing to confess, shouted her final words from the stake. "You will never know love. Your names will rot, and your graves will be empty." Witnesses said her voice carried to a crowd like thunder. The hunters wrote the moment off as the devil speaking through her. But the villagers remembered every word. The hunters' vow of celibacy was supposed to keep them pure, but over time, it became a poison. They saw women only as tools of the devil, gateways through which temptation crept. To them, even a smile was dangerous. Even kindness could be a trap. They lived in small groups, eating together, praying together, sleeping on hard floors in abandoned monasteries or in barns offered by frightened villagers. Never once did they share a heart for the wife or the laughter of children. But while they claimed this made them holy, stories grew of their eyes twitching in the night, of nightmares that shook them awake. Some claimed the hunters screamed in their sleep, calling out to women who were not there, seeing ghostly brides standing at their doors, beckoning with pale hands. One tale from a German village tells of a hunter who woke every night to the sound of wedding bells. He would rush outside into the cold, but the church stood dark and silent. The villagers said he was haunted by a bride who had died under his torture, forever demanding the marriage he denied her. Another account spoke of hunters scratching at their chests until they bled, as though invisible hands were clawing them. They believed the witches had cursed them with eternal loneliness, that no matter how much they prayed, no absolution could erase what had been spoken in the final breaths of their victims. The records of their brotherhood show that within 2 generations, their numbers dwindled. None of them left heirs. None of them built homes. They simply vanished. What began as a holy order designed to spread fear and root out evil ended as a collection of nameless graves scattered across Europe. Yet the graves themselves became part of the legend. in one French parish. When the villagers tried to open the tomb of a hunter years later, they found it empty. In another, the bones were twisted as though they had been gnawed. These discoveries only strengthened the belief that the curse was real, that the earth itself rejected them. The Brotherhood left no songs, no family names carried forward, no children to speak of them. The only legacy they carried into history were the whispers that they had been cursed by the very women they condemned, that their vow of celibacy was not a holy shield, but the trap that doomed them to extinction. And as their story spread, so did the fear. For the villagers who lived under their shadow, the curse was not a distant myth, but a warning that hatred, once unleashed, never dies peacefully. As Europe moved into the 17th century, witch hunting continued, but this particular brotherhood had all but disappeared. Still, the echoes of their vow lingered. People told children not to speak ill of marriage, not to mock love, not to deny companionship, for fear of suffering the hunter's fate. In some regions, girls were told at their weddings that they must always honor their vows, lest the curse of the celibate hunters fall on their families. To this day, ruins of monasteries where the hunters once gathered are said to be haunted, filled with whispers of women's laughter echoing through the halls. The curse of the witch hunters was more than superstition. It was a consequence of a life lived without compassion, a punishment born not just from witches' dying words, but from the hunters' own choices. By swearing never to love, never to marry, they ensured their own destruction. They tried to erase women from their lives, and in doing so, erased themselves from history. The story of the witch hunters did not end with their disappearance. It grew darker in legend, carried by the voices of villagers who swore they had seen the curse unfold before their very eyes. For generations, people told tales of hunters tormented by visions, plagued by ghostly brides and phantom children. These stories were not written in official records, for the Brotherhood left no chroniclers behind, but they lived on in whispered folklore, passed down by those who claimed to have heard the hunters screaming in the night. The most common tale was of the ghostly brides. It was said that in the quiet hours before dawn, the hunters would awaken to the sound of bells tolling softly in the distance. The air would fill with the scent of roses, though no flowers grew nearby. And there at the foot of their beds stood women in white gowns, their veils covering pale faces, their hands outstretched. These brides never spoke, but their silence was more terrifying than any curse. The hunters would sit paralyzed, staring at the figures until they faded with the morning light. Some were found trembling, unable to eat, unable to speak of what they had seen. Others claimed the brides followed them wherever they went, their footsteps echoing on lonely roads, their shadows slipping through the walls of monasteries. To the villagers, these were the souls of women condemned to death, returned to demand the vows of marriage that were denied them in life. Another haunting took the form of ghostly children. In several towns, hunters reported hearing the cries of infants in their sleep. They would search the corners of their rooms, rip open their bedding, even dig to the floorboards, but no children were found. Some claimed to feel tiny hands tugging at their cloaks, or to see small faces staring at them from the darkness. A legend from Scotland tells of a hunter driven to madness after nights of hearing a baby wailing just outside his door. When he finally opened it, he saw nothing but an empty cradle rocking in the wind. He abandoned his post and was later found wandering the hills, muttering about children that were not his. To the people of the time, this was proof that the hunter's vow of celibacy had cursed them with the very thing they feared most, phantom families that would never be real. As the decades passed, entire towns turned against them. At first, villagers tolerated their presence out of fear, but when misfortune seemed to multiply, patience broke. Farmers hid their daughters, refusing to let them be questioned. Mothers barred their doors when hunters came knocking. There are accounts of towns where hunters arrived and were refused food and shelter, forced to sleep in fields while the villagers prayed for them to move on. In some places, mobs formed. Stones were thrown, barns set ablaze, and hunters driven out with curses of their own. It was a dangerous reversal. Those who had once accused others of witchcraft now found themselves accused of being agents of misfortune. The curse was no longer a whisper. It was a weapon wielded by the people to rid themselves of the Brotherhood's shadow. By the 17th century, only a handful of hunters remained. They gathered in ruined monasteries, Their numbers too few to inspire fear as they once had. Records suggest they still clung to their vows, still wrote prayers and confessions in crumbling journals. One such record, preserved in fragments, describes a leader lamenting the end of their order. "We are dying and no sons carry our names. We have kept the oath, but God has abandoned us." Their writing carried no hope, only resignation. They had created a legacy of fear, but had built nothing lasting for themselves. With no children, no families, no ties to the living world, they were like shadows fading into the past. The curse revealed itself most chillingly in their deaths. In one town, hunters were buried in the churchyard, but years later, when the grave was disturbed during renovations, villagers claimed the coffins were empty. In another account, bones were unearthed so twisted and broken that the villagers believed the earth itself had tried to spit them out. Priests refused to consecrate their remains, fearing that the curse would spread. Instead, the bones were scattered in fields, left for the crows. In folklore, this became the ultimate proof that the Brotherhood had been condemned, not by witches, but by heaven itself. Stories of their downfall spread across Europe, each region shaping the legend in its own way. In Germany, tales spoke of bride wraiths who lured hunters into forests and drowned them in rivers. In France, a cursed chalice was said to pass between the last members, burning the lips of anyone who tried to drink. In Scotland, entire villages believed the hunters were hunted themselves, pursued by ghostly infants who wailed until men lost their minds. These variations shared a single theme. The hunters' refusal of love, family, and humanity had left them open to a supernatural vengeance that would not rest. Even as witch trials continued under other authorities, the story of this brotherhood became a cautionary tale. Parents told children never to mock marriage, never to scorn companionship, for fear of being left alone and forgotten like the hunters. Newlyweds were warned that to break their vows was to invite the same loneliness the hunters had endured. The idea of the curse became so ingrained that ruins of monasteries associated with the hunters were avoided. Travelers reported laughter in the night, doors slamming on their own, or pale figures watching from broken windows. Locals refused to step inside, claiming the hunters still wandered within, forever searching for the wives they had denied themselves. In time, historians dismissed these stories as folklore, pointing out the obvious truth. Men who refused to marry and have children would naturally leave no descendants, and their order would vanish on its own. Yet for those who lived in the shadow of their presence, the curse felt real. Misfortunes that struck after their arrival could not be ignored. Dreams of ghostly brides and phantom children could not be explained away. And the empty graves, whether symbolic or true, sealed the legend forever. The hunters became a warning that hatred consumes its master. By rejecting love, they had rejected the very essence of life. By refusing family, they had doomed their bloodlines. Whether their destruction came from witches' dying words, from divine punishment, or from their own choices, the outcome was the same. They were erased from history, their names unremembered, their graves abandoned. All that remains is the story of the curse, a ghostly reminder that no man can live by fear alone. So were they truly cursed, or did their own vow of celibacy doom them from the start? Perhaps both. Perhaps the curse was not a spell whispered by witches, but the cruel irony of life itself. To deny love is to deny humanity, and to deny humanity is to leave nothing behind but silence. The hunters believed they were holy warriors, but time proved them to be nothing more than shadows. Their legacy became a tale told by frightened villagers, a ghost story carried across generations. If you stand in the ruins of their old monasteries today, some say you can still hear them. Not prayers, not hymns, but the mocking laughter of women, carried on the wind. It is the laughter of those they condemned, reminding the world that hatred cannot last, that vows made in fear turn to dust. The witch hunters who never married thought they could outwit love, but in the end, it was love's absence that destroyed them. Tell me, if you were offered the chance to spend a night in those ruins, would you dare? Would you sit in the silence, waiting to hear the bells of a ghostly wedding or the cries of phantom children? Or would you, like the villagers of old, walk quickly past and whisper a prayer, hoping never to see the cursed hunters again? Because whether the curse was real or not, the story remains. And sometimes, the story is enough to keep the dead awake.